Hello everyone and welcome back to yet another jungle video. As we all know, jungling can be a bit tough when you first start out, or even if you get autofilled. You have no idea what the other jungler is doing, and you have no idea what they plan on doing later on in the game, and how their specific champion wants to play the game. It can cause confusion and unnecessary losses when people are not on the same page, and in some cases, it can make new players stop playing the jungle role completely, simply because they don't understand what is going on and they don't want that stress and responsibility on their hands. I don't really like that. I think the jungle role is really fun and it can be for everyone. It's like a little chess game within League of Legends, and the better player usually makes the better move. But in order to make great moves, you need to know more about the jungle role. And the great tips and explanations should not be behind a massive paywall. It should be free, just like this video. So I have placed every single jungle champion into a certain bracket, and I will explain each champion and what they are generally looking for in game, and it should help you plan out your games better. These are the champions right here. And these champions are picked out by API tools like u.gg or LOL Analytics, and they are between the ranks of Iron and Emerald. So a proper step from low elo to mid elo. There might be some champion like say Yorick Jungle that the tool does not pick up because not enough people play them there, so keep that in mind if you miss out a specific champion in this list. A quick reminder that this is not an S to F tier list like most guides do. I think those lists are useless because if, say, Rek'Sai is S tier and I've never played Rek'Sai before, is that champion still S tier in my hands? Probably not. Therefore, those types of lists generally have no real value. This list is more about pattern recognition and better planning for your jungle games, so with that in mind, let's get straight into it. We have 6 brackets, and in the first bracket we have champions that plays for objectives mainly. These are champions who can gank, farm and fight just fine, but will mostly focus on grabbing the big objectives for their team. Objectives like Void Grubs, Dragon, Herald, Early Towers, etc. They have very good damage versus objectives, and they are usually strong enough to solo these objectives when nobody notices and take them down very fast. With the exception of Nunu, these champions will probably win the 1v1 if you try to contest them without your team. So, here we have Nunu, Udyr, Shyvana, Warwick and Trundle. And now I'll go a bit more in depth about each champion. Nunu will gank early with a snowball, gain lane priority, and then use that priority to run straight to the objective on that side. If he can't get priority, he will most likely try again somewhere else. Nunu does not want straight up 1v1s. His Q smite is very powerful, and that is why he is really good around the big objectives. And then we have Udyr. Udyr looks for 1v1 fights or fights that are heavily favored for his team. If he's Q-maxing, his single target damage is very high and he can take dragons and other objectives really fast, and he's hard to fight. If he's R-maxing, he's more of an AoE threat and will try to team fight more often. And then we have Shyvana. Shyvana is easier to fight, but deals very good damage and has many playstyles: AP, AD and Bruiser. She will focus on dragons early on for her passive stacking. Warwick has the same playstyle as Nunu, but will chase down kills with his passive instead. He is also way better than Nunu in a straight up 1v1 because of his sustain. And lastly we have Trundle. Trundle does not have the best ganks early unless the enemy team is way overextended. Trundle will mostly farm camps, look for favored fights and deals a great amount of single target damage versus Dragon, Void Grubs and Herald. Only fight him if your champion is stronger or if you have a numbers advantage. And then we have the next bracket, the champions that have a weaker early game, very little CC tools and wins the game by outpacing and outfarming their opponents. These champions will most likely stay quiet in the early levels, farm their camps until level 6 when they unlock a big power spike, and then use that power spike to accelerate faster and faster. They are not very good at contesting objectives alone unless they already have an established lead or their team is helping them. And here we have Belveth, Brand, Karthus, Master Yi, Gwen, Hecarim, Graves, Kindred, Jax, Evelyn, Kha'Zix, Viego, Fiddlesticks, Nasus, Teemo, Neferi and Zed. Now Belveth will mostly farm. She will look for early Skullcrab fights and then rush to level 6. She can fight early versus some champions, but preferably just wants to farm in the early game. Later on, she becomes more of a threat. Brand is one of the fastest farmers in the game, will quickly do all his jungle camps and then look for something on the map. If a lane is overextended, he will gank, if not, he will recall and farm jungle camps again. Brand can do objectives very fast thanks to his burn. And then we have Karthus, same as Brand, but he will use his ult from the jungle and try to secure kills to gain a massive gold lead. Karthus is very bad in a straight up 1v1 and he likes to run Smite Exhaust in order to help himself in those fights. And very powerful once ahead. Later on, it's very normal for Karthus to int in a team fight just so he can make full use out of his passive. Master Yi. Many people think that Yi sucks early, but this is not true. His ganks are trash, but his 1v1 is actually really good. Yi wants to power farm and get to his first item as soon as possible. Farm camps, look for a free kill, recall and repeat. Don't fight Yi alone. If you are even in gold and he has Blade of the Ruined King, you will always lose. And then we have Gwen. Gwen is the same as Master Yi, but pretty much an AP variation of him. Farm jungle to your first item and then look for favorable fights for you. You snowball the game once you have a lead. Hecarim has very good AoE clear in the early game and he can fight versus the right opponent, but he takes time to ramp up in fights because of Conqueror and his Q stacks. Once he is fully stacked, Hecarim is very powerful. He will mostly farm and play the opposite side of the enemy jungler in order to safely power up. We'll look for big team fights later in the game when he has a lead with his ultimate. Then we have Graves. Graves has a very slow first clear, but it gets faster and faster with levels and items. Graves deal a lot of damage and can out-pressure the enemy by constantly invading and threatening to take enemy camps. And we have Kindred. Kindred has a unique playstyle that can mind control her opponents to care too much about her passive marks and lose map pressure. The rule is quite simple. If Kindred is strong, she will fight you for the mark. If Kindred is weak, she will play the opposite side of the other jungler and continue to farm and scale up. If Kindred is stupid, she will invade for the mark while being weak and throw the game. If you let Kindred farm uncontested and gain every mark for free, she will win the game on her own. Next up we have Jax, and Jax is a bit of a mix between Gwen and Master Yi, but he can gank early with his leap and counter-strike. He's very good versus auto-attack based champions and will mostly look to farm for his first item, which is a massive power spike for him. And then we have Evelyn. Farm for level 6, look to kill your priority target, and slowly take over the game by being everywhere in the mind of your opponent. Evelyn loses the game if she falls behind the gold curve, because she's terrible at playing catch-up. Then we have Kha'Zix. Try to ignore your team as much as you can. You should only focus on farming for gold and XP, because the higher level you are, the better your kit becomes. With Q evolve, Kha'Zix one-shots objectives. W evolve make him way better in skirmishes because of his slow. You can choose E or R evolve depending on what you need for that specific game. He will play like an assassin later on and take out his priority target. Viego will mostly focus on power farming in the early game and get to level 6. Once he has access to Kraken Slayer, he will start looking for fights that favor him and try to increase his own lead. Viego likes messy teamfights around objectives, where he can use his resets and jump from champion form to champion form and take over the fight. Fiddlesticks wants to avoid big fights in the early game and wants to reach level 6 as fast as possible. Once he's level 6, he will look for an angle where he can ult, fear everyone and deal a lot of damage. Fiddlesticks is not the best champion in a straight up 5 versus 5 that works front to back, because he's very squishy and he can get kited. Fiddlesticks wants to play around the fog of war and land a big ultimate when you least expect it. That way he has maximum effect. And then Nasus will farm the jungle for 20 minutes straight and come out with 500-600 stacks. Nasus only really played jungle in the lower elos because he's very weak in the early game and is easily invaded, and in lower elos people don't usually invade him, so he's kinda safe. Once he feels strong, he will look for fights. Nasus hates champions that can kite him because he has no dashes and generally is quite slow himself. And then we have Teemo. Teemo will power farm to level 6 and then start taking over the enemy jungle with mushrooms and make it impossible for the enemy team to move on the map without being seen. Teemo can be a DPS champion or a burst champion depending on the build. Most of the time he will look to fight you around his mushrooms or force you to walk through his mushrooms in order to get to the objective or the fight. And then we have Naafiri. Slow in the early game and wants to farm to level 6. Once she has items and her ultimate, she will look to kill priority targets. With Hydra items, she can become a very good power farmer. Naafiri jungle is only really played in low elo, and the higher you climb, the less success you will see with her because people understand how to play against you and how to punish you. And lastly we have Zed, same as Naafiri but with a faster clear and more outplay potential. Zed can keep farming camps very easily, get ahead and look to abuse the enemy jungler, especially if they are squishy, because they can't deal with his high amount of damage. Zed sucks versus tankier team comps with a lot of CC. And just an add-on here because I actually forgot to put her in the bracket, Nidalee. God tier in high elo, dog shit in lower elos. Nidalee only works by putting an insane amount of pressure on the enemy jungler early, forcing them into mistakes and then capitalizing on those mistakes. She farms very fast, she deals a good amount of damage, but is mechanically hard to pull off. You can play her and find success, but as soon as you play against a jungler with better fundamentals than you have, you will always lose, unless you are simply a better player. And then in the next bracket, we have champions that play to kill a specific target. It can be the enemy jungler by constantly invading them, it can be the enemy AD carry or mid laner, or simply the champion with the highest chance of carrying for the enemy team. The plan here is simple, one-shot that target. With the exception of Malphite, the other champions are mostly used by smurfs to abuse newer players, because the champions are very different in the hands of a skilled player in comparison to a new player. And here we have Rengar, Shaco, Twitch, Malphite and Talon. Rengar wants to look for early Skullcrab fights with the bushes and might invade if he has a favorable matchup. Once Rengar reaches level 6, he will play like an assassin and hunt for his target. Rengar players are notorious for throwing their leads by chasing the same target over and over again, getting kills, but not actually getting stuff done and taking objectives. Rengar sucks versus tankier team comps that can survive his ambush. Rengar can also be played as a tankier bruiser. And then we have Shaco. Shaco will play to live inside of the enemy's head. He's very likely to play with Ignite and kill you in the first few levels, or gank a lane and get his own laner ahead. Shaco has two major playstyles, AP and AD, and both are viable in their own way. Shaco will look to gain a big lead, either by playing mind games with his opponent and forcing mistakes, or he might split push and create pressure that way. And then we have Twitch, which is not very popular right now and hasn't been for a long time, but is still played by smurfs. Twitch has a very tough time farming his jungle camps early, so he will play a bit like Shaco in the early game and force early ganks with his invisibility. If he's successful, he will gain enough gold to buy items, and now his jungle clear is quite decent. If he can't get gold in the early game, then Twitch simply loses the game. If Twitch is weak, You can freely invade him and he does not have an answer to it. When Twitch is strong, he will look to flank his target and open up with his ultimate, shredding the entire enemy team by himself. And then we have Malphite, which is quite hilarious that he's on this list, but he's played in lower elos. And in most cases it's AP Malphite and not a tank. AP Malphite is played like a bullet, but you are the bullet. You have enough damage to one-shot your target, but the problem is that your entire one-shot combo is flashable and blockable. Early game, Malphite can only farm his jungle camps because he's bad at fighting. He has terrible ganks, and when he has his ultimate and some AP, he will look to try and one-shot someone. Items like Hex Drinker or Zhonya's completely destroys AP Malphite, and once he can't one-shot someone, he serves no purpose in the game other than a knockup. And then we have Talon. Talon will play aggressively in the early game, with Ignite and his superior map movement. He can invade you and kill you pretty easily with his early game damage, or he can gank from a weird angle that you can't prepare for. Just like Rengar, Talon players are notorious for throwing away their leads if they focus on only getting kills and not taking objectives. Talon can play as an assassin or as a bruiser, so he has some adaptability. Then we have champions that likes to play for small skirmishes. Skirmishes are 2v2 fights, 3v3 fights, mostly around something important in the early game, like an early Scuttle Crab or the first dragon or Void Grubs. They are very powerful in the early game, and if they gain a big enough lead in that early game, they will be very hard to stop. Some of them scale very hard and others will fall off, but will try their best to end the game as soon as possible. These champions will be very active in the early game, otherwise they will lose. And in this bracket we have Rek'Sai, Elise, Xin Zhao, Lee Sin, New Scanner, Placeholder, and Briar, Ivern, Sylas, Volibear and Mordekaiser. Now Rek'Sai is very hard to fight in the early game because she deals so much damage. With her passive, she can scout out where people are walking and surprise them. Her early clear is not very good, but her ganks are insane. Rek'Sai will try and get an early game lead in most of her games, get her team ahead with that lead, and then end the game before she falls off. And then we have Elise. Elise is one of the best tower divers in the game because of her ability to reset tower aggro. In low elo, it's hard to coordinate with the team because players don't understand her, so she loses a lot of value. Her farming speed is not very good, and Elise needs an early game lead to transition into the mid game in order to still be a threat. Once Elise is ahead, she has an easy time getting on top of her opponents, CCing them and then one-shotting them. And then we have Xin Zhao, probably the best level 3 champion in the jungle. Massive power spike because of his damage and dash. Xin Zhao knows that he's only strong for a limited time, and the longer the game goes, the higher the chance of him losing. He needs to be active in the early game, gain a lead, and use that lead to end the game. Otherwise, what's the point of playing Xin Zhao? Then we have Lee Sin. He's pretty much the same as Xin Zhao, but harder to play, but has more depth to his kit, which can make it easier for a good player to carry. And this Scanner right here is not actually the recent Scanner, it's a placeholder for the new Scanner that is coming soon. But in general, even with the rework, Scanner wants to fight around the big objectives with his crowd control, gain a lead, and use that lead to out-pressure his opponent. It's unclear how much damage he has in his new kit, as his rework has not hit live service yet. Once he is actually released, we will come back to the new Scanner. Moving on to Briar. Briar is a more aggressive version of Xin Zhao, with even more lifesteal and damage reduction. Briar wants to gain a lead and impact the map with her ultimate and then use that lead to take down objectives. Once ahead, Briar is very hard to take down because of the insane healing she gets from items and her kit, but if Briar is behind, she's pretty much useless. And then we have Ivern, a very unique playstyle. He farms very fast by freeing his camps instead of killing them, and therefore he can have a very unpredictable pathing. Ivern wins the game by providing insane support value to his team. He deals some damage with himself and Daisy, but his shielding and healing is what wins him the game. Ivern needs someone on his team that can carry him, someone to shield and heal and provide support for. If Ivern's team is too far behind, it's very hard for him to play. At the same time, when he's ahead, Ivern is very hard to take down because of the constant CC, healing and shields. And then we have Sylas. Sylas can have a very tough jungle clear in the early game and wants to find a fight early where he can gain a lead, get enough XP and gold to start farming better. Sylas heals a lot throughout the entire fight, and he has a lot of success if your team has very good ultimates for him to use. Sylas is best played as a counter pick to certain champions like Maokai, Malphite or Sejuani. And then we have Volibear. Overall, Volibear is a very strong champion, and his abilities allow him to fight for a very long time. Most of the time, he will look for a good gank in the early game and tower dive, or fight around a big objective. He's tanky, he deals a lot of damage, and can turn off turrets with his ultimate. His biggest weakness is being kited and CC'd, because outside of his Q, he's actually pretty slow. If you deny Volibear the big fight he's looking for, he actually offers very little to the game. And lastly we have Mordekaiser. Mordekaiser is only really played in the jungle and lower elos. He can farm the jungle at a decent pace, and versus the right matchups he can straight up bully people. Mordekaiser can't afford to fall behind, so he needs to either outfarm his opponent or be very aggressive and find a lead in the early game. If he falls too far behind, he offers no kill pressure and will be quite useless, even to the point where if he ults someone, they will kill him inside of his own ult. And then next up we have champions that likes the really big team fights around objectives or fights that usually end the game. These are different from skirmish, but it's still fighting. These champions offer a lot in terms of teamfight value. They can either engage or disengage, shut down their opponents or disrupt the enemy team. They are not the best farming champions or the best damage dealers, but with a good team around them, it's easy for them to start a fight and help their team win the game. And here we have Jarvan, Vi, Amumu, Rammus, Sejuani, Zac, Maokai, Rel, Taliyah, Poppy, Gragas, Wukong, Rumble, Morgana and Zyra. Now Jarvan is overall one of the most solid junglers over nearly 15 years of gameplay. He has damage, engage, a very powerful ultimate. Jarvan can gank quite aggressively in the early game or farm depending on what the map look like. Later on, he will look to engage on a carry and hold them in place for his team to deal the damage. If Jarvan is really ahead and builds damage, he can straight up one-shot his target. Jarvan gets insane value if he is picked into champions that don't have any dashes, like Twisted Fate or Jinx. Then we have Vi, pretty much the same as Jarvan, but with better single target selection thanks to her ultimate. Vi is really good at taking objectives and starting fights around objectives. She can look for early ganks, early jungle fights, or she can simply farm for her level 6 and then look for a big team fight. Vi lacks the farming speed of other junglers, but she makes up for it once she's actually fighting. And then we have Amumu. Amumu brings a lot of CC to the table, and in general he's looking for big team fights like Malphite, but the difference is Amumu can still deal a lot of damage even as a tank. Even if Amumu falls behind, he still have very easy access to his ultimate and can still help his team win a fight. Some people play Amumu full AP and look to one-shot entire teams on their own, but it comes with its own risks. Moving on, we have Rammus, a very slow farmer, and should only be played as a counter pick to certain champions like Graves or Master Yi or full AD teams, or be used to spam gank lanes non-stop. Rammus only deals damage if you actually hit him and sucks versus AP champions. If you're not ganking and only farming as Rammus, you will fall behind immediately. Then we have Sejuani, who's a very underrated champion. Deals decent damage, is very mobile and has easy access to her target via her ultimate. Sejuani wants to play with her team around big objectives where she can provide the CC and tankiness that allows her team the space to win the fight for her. Then we have Zac, very similar to Sejuani but with better ganks and teamfight access. Deals a lot of damage even as a tank and can make teamfighting really hard for the enemy carries. Zac always looks for early ganks with his long range E in the early game. Then we have Maokai, who's the same as Sejuani but is a bit better at controlling the team fights, especially near big objectives. And he has the ability to start his ult from very far away and catch people out even when they think they are safe. Rel is the same as Maokai but deals less damage and wants to fight early. Rel Jungle is currently on the shopping block on the PBE and might be removed permanently from the role because of her being so favored in pro play. These nerfs might be removed from the PBE, I don't know as of yet, but she's still in this bracket. Then we have Taliyah. Taliyah provides insane value for a single champion. She deals enough damage to be a carry, and she has enough utility to win teamfights. She's very good against champions with a dash, and with her ultimate, she will look to split teams and isolate her targets. Poppy is a version of Rammus on crack. She deals very good damage, she's very tanky, she's not the best at farming, but she can spam gank just like Rammus or Nunu, and she has a lot of tools in her kit with lots of CC. Then we move on to Gragas, who has two playstyles in either full AP or tank. Gragas farms very fast and is very good at teamfighting thanks to his ultimate. Gragas has very easy gank access with his E-flash and his ultimate, and once ahead, Gragas can feel very tough to play against. Very good sustain with his passive and very hard to kill with the damage reduction from his W and constant E-dashing. Then we have Wukong, which isn't really played as much in the jungle anymore but is still picked in lower elos. He plays mostly like a Jarvan. He can fight early if his team has priority, otherwise he farms for level 6 and hopes for a big team fight where he can take over. Wukong deals a lot of damage and can be hard to kill, especially once he's ahead. Then we have Rumble. Rumble wants to farm and reach level 6 as fast as possible. Once Rumble has his ult, his ganks are very good and his damage output is crazy. He can be quite tanky with his W shield and the HP that he gets from his items, and he wants to look for fights in very tight spaces around the big objectives, especially inside of the jungle. If he gets a good ultimate down, the enemy team straight up loses the fight because they can't stand in it without dying. Rumble is not very good when played from behind. And then we have Morgana, who's very underrated in the jungle. She has a very decent clear, very good CC and very good team fighting. Just like Ivern, Morgana is more of a support champion than a carry. You provide the space for your team to win the game for you. You shield your carries and you try to control the enemy team as best as you can. And lastly we have Zyra. The same as Morgana, underrated but has way more damage. Zyra can easily be a carry if she plays for it. Lots of CC, lots of damage, insane objective damage, and can easily control a teamfight. And then we have the final bracket, the champions that play for everything. They are usually really good at farming fast, they can fight early, they can play for objectives, and they have big teamfight presence. But individually, they are not the best at each of those things, just very good overall. You can argue that more champions can fit into this bracket, but these are the ones that I feel suits lower elos, and they are perfect for junglers that are looking for consistency. First up we have Diana, one of my personal favorites. Diana excels at outpacing her opponent. You can fight early if you want to, and you have two major playstyles. You either go DPS or you go burst. You can fight for an extended time with your W shield and Conqueror, and overall you are just a very solid champion every game. Then we have Kayn. The most difficult part about Kayn is his passive. You want to choose the correct form for that specific game versus those specific champions. But I and many others feel that Rust, the red version of Kayn, is overall the better champion thanks to his CC and teamfighting presence. Blue Kayn is probably better for smurfing, but if you're playing in your own elo, Red Kayn just offers more value. You farm fast, you deal very good damage, you have very easy gank access and fight access thanks to your E, and your ult can buy you a lot of time in a fight. Then we have Echo. Similar to Diana, you have the ability to farm early if you want and just scale. You fight very good later on, especially with your ult. Echo has very high single target damage and is pretty much an assassin in the right hands. And he's very hard to catch and kill. One very underrated part of Echo's gameplay is his tower taking. Once he has enough AP, he straight up one-shots towers. And then we have Nocturne, one of the best champions at capitalizing on the biggest mistakes in low elo, poor map awareness. Nocturne is very strong at every part of the game. You can fight early, you can farm, you can play for objectives. Once you reach level 6, you just wait for someone to overextend a little bit and you get a free kill. After that, you can use that prio to snowball into bigger objectives and become unstoppable. Jungle Nocturne should, in my opinion, always be played as a bruiser and not an assassin. Bruiser Nocturne deals very good damage and survives for way longer, which is very important when you play around big objectives. And then finally we have Lilia. Lilia has pretty much everything a jungler wants except for a dash. She has fast clears, good damage, good ultimate, good ganks, good teamfights. She's very solid as a champion. She has the option of going more damage or being a bruiser depending on what her team needs, and her ability to run around her opponents is only really matched by Udyr. Lilia is the perfect champion for someone learning the jungle who's looking for some AP damage to add to their champion pool. And this is it. Every champion that currently plays in the jungle role from Iron to Emerald. They are placed into their own bracket, and we now know what each champion likes to do and what they generally play for. Some champions can be good at more than one thing, I think that is obvious, but I think I nailed the core identity of each champion into the correct bracket. Let me know in the comments if you disagree with some of my placements and why. I hope this video served well as a learning experience for new junglers and even people that don't jungle. Maybe you can now play around these champions in a more efficient way when you understand what to look for. This video took a long time to write, so I appreciate a like if you felt like it gave you some value, and maybe now you want to play jungle even more. If you're unsure of what role you want to play and you want more information on each role, then this video might be good for you. But for now, thank you for watching and see you next time. Goodbye.